Hi, and welcome to the Modern Persian Food Podcast. We are food bloggers,
Bita Arabian,
and Bita Nazim Kelly, and we're here to share with you the rich flavors and fresh ingredients of Persian cooking and how to incorporate them into today's modern lifestyles.
We're excited to introduce you to the flavors, tastes, and techniques we use, and also our own cultural stories and perspectives growing up in the U.S. in a Persian family. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 76. Today we'll be covering how to preserve culture through food and music. And we're joined by the lovely Nadia Deljou of Delle Dining. Nadia is passionate about cooking, Persian cuisine, exploring music, and all of the senses and tying it together to preserve our culture. So thank you so much for joining us, Nadia. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here.
And of course, we're also joined by my co-host, Bita June. Hi, Bita.
Hi there, Bita June. Hi, Nadia June. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on our show with us.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks. We're excited to talk about food and music and pairing and what you've got going on with Delle. Tell us about your approach about preserving Persian culture through the amazing food and music and other senses.
Yeah, so I was raised in a Iranian-American household, culturally through a Persian-Iranian lens. Religiously, my father, his side of the family was kind of raised and born Jewish. So it was a kind of interesting interplay of Judaism and Iranian-ness and, through an American lens, being born and raised in the South. So you can imagine the kind of like combination of different influences and cuisines and just mindsets from a young age. Mm-hmm. So I was raised in the arts industry. My father and his two brothers, when they moved here from Iran, they opened up a fine art publishing company called Deljou Art Group. Always was highly immersed in the arts from a very young age. And a lot of family members, from cousins to aunts to uncles and my grandfather, all at some point worked in the food industry, different cafes, back of house, front of house, all that kind of stuff. So from a super young age, always immersed in like a very creative entrepreneurship kind of environment, right? Where family was at the foreground of everything, gathering specifically over, food and hosting. As we know, hospitality is like a huge thing in the Persian culture. Mm-hmm. So I think, from a young age, I was always immersed really heavily through all these mediums. And I think it gave me an opportunity to identify through various mediums and also understand my identity in a very multifaceted way. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of become a lot more conscious of what my culture means to me, because I think you identify so strongly as a young child in America, trying to understand your identity and what interests you have and what passions you have and how you fit into the greater context of the world and society. But I think as I've gotten older and through my work within the context of food, I've been able to kind of consciously pick out what aspects of my culture resonate with me and why it has importance. I don't think we particularly asked ourselves that growing up, right? Culture is it's like what you're fed, you understand hospitality and gathering is just kind of what Persians do, or certain foods you eat because you were fed them from a very young age or stuff like that. But I think as I've gotten older, I've been able to recognize the purpose of all these things, be it ingredients in the Persian cuisine or the type of music we listen to or the poetry, all that kind of stuff, develop meaning for myself, and then figure out how to package that and present it to the world in a very educational way. I'm big on exposure. I'm big on understanding just the purpose of certain things and how they exist in the greater context of cuisine and culture. I've been thinking a lot as an Iranian-American how my generation has preserved our culture, because Iranian culture is it's a very oral history, right? There's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of, I'm doing this, I'm interacting with this because I saw my grandpa do it or my grandma do it. And I think seeing how, for example, a few of my friends preserve their sense of culture through going to Iran a few times a year and connecting with the land, or others love Persian poetry and they read Persian books and understand the literature of the culture. I do it through the way I engage with the cuisine and like the ingredients of our heritage. Other people do it through the music that they listen to or the instruments that they play. So I think it's really interesting, like as generations continue to evolve, we're at the end of the day, like moving further and further away from of like the origin of Iranian culture, right? We're becoming more integrated into American culture, marrying different ethnicities, all that kind of stuff. Traditions are changing. I think it's important to ask, like, what aspects resonate with us? What do they mean? And how do we continue to preserve that for not only ourselves, but generations to come after us?
Absolutely. I think that you bring up some really interesting points. First of all, I think that's so amazing that you were exposed to all of the arts and culture at such a young age, you know, like with your family background and where you lived and all of that kind of helping form who you are as a person and your beliefs. So I think that's pretty awesome. And then also the different platforms that you mentioned as ways of expression, of your expression and your friends' expressions of how the arts and music and food can really help express who you are and build a relationship with your culture individually.
I love hearing the stories. I can personally identify so much with what you shared. Thank you for sharing that. Having grown up in the Midwest, and even though both my parents were Iranian, I was so immersed into the culture that I, in some ways, lost it. Right. And have like had to come back. The way that you described how through food, you know, everyone can enjoy food. Everyone can enjoy music. Everyone can enjoy tastes and smells. And it's just such a great way to not only preserve our culture by doing those things, but to feel like you fit in. And I think that my journey has also helped me to feel just more grounded and to find my identity as an Iranian-American. So
definitely. Yeah, to piggyback off what you were saying, I think it's really interesting, this concept of like feeling empowered by our culture and really owning it. To your point, like being raised in part of American geography, that the representation of Iranian culture, ethnic cultures are not as like dominant. And I'll speak for myself, but I think, you know, a lot of people that I've spoken to kind of resonate with this sentiment of like you kind of wanted to hide those parts of yourself or integrate more seamlessly into kind of like the status quo of society or what was trendy or what was cool. And it's interesting, as you get older, I feel like you kind of want to go back to your roots, right? And you want to like really hone in on like those parts of yourself, because at the end of the day, it's like integral to your identity. And I think it is a wonderful opportunity to like really deeply connect to the greater world around you. So I just find it super fascinating, like looking at the trajectory of like adolescent to young adult to mid adult, being like, wow, like now I like wear my Iranian-ness as loud as I can. And I'm still in the process of understanding what that means to me and like how I can express it in a way that also preserves it, if that makes sense, you know?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I did do a little bit of homework on you and in preparation for this conversation. And it's not just the Persian culture. I noticed that in your private dining and your cooking classes that you expand. Well, now I understand, you know, with the Israeli, but where does the Moroccan fit in and some of these other cultures?
Great question. Well, I think in general, my approach to dining and cuisine kind of lies within the Mediterranean, Middle Eastern flavor profile. So like think lots of warm spices, really fresh, vibrant herbs, lots of citrus, really punchy flavors. But at the end of the day, it still gives you that heartwarming sense of nourishment, you know? Maybe this kind of goes back to that concept of preservation, but something that I had a conscious thought of a while ago is the concept of like a sabzi plate, right? And it's a traditional way in which you eat food. I'm fascinated by like food etiquette as well. Like when you gather around a table with your family or your friends, like it's almost like a dance, be it the hosting aspect or even the way in which people eat. Do they eat with their hands? What is the purpose of having raw onion and raw herbs on the side of your dishes beyond even like the medicinal quality, you know? And I've just been trying to understand like how I've been subconsciously integrating a lot of these traditions and behaviors in my current cooking. And I was looking at just like pictures of the food that we've made throughout the last year of the dinners. And every single dish, without fail, has fresh herbs integrated into it in some capacity, right? Again, apart from the medicinal quality and the digestive quality of the herbs, like they're so integral to the eating experience. And I just find that fascinating to see how I like subconsciously in every single dish, an herb is integrated in some capacity, fresh, cooked, fried, pickled, anything, as I guess an extension of like that mindset of like the sabzi plate when we were younger, you know?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see that evolve. I'm super interested in also like the crossover, the commonality between cuisines as well. You know, like you see certain spices used across multiple cuisines. You see obviously fresh herbs, or even just the concept of like rice in Moroccan cuisine and Persian cuisine. Like, what purpose does it play? How does it engage with the food? How do just the overall like presence of a certain ingredient, I think, is really fascinating. So I found a lot of commonality and crossover with specifically spices and overall, like, I guess, hosting etiquette and the purpose of welcoming people into your home, offering them a piece of your heart at the end of the day, like really offering a sense of nourishment beyond just like, I'm here to eat because I'm hungry, you know?
Right.
Food is so much more than food. It's about that greater context that we've discussed a little bit. So yeah, I think generally that's kind of what you can find with the cuisine that I cook. And I think it's an opportunity to also just explore the complexity of what cuisine means and how I think, you know, food across the globe is a lot more similar than we think. That's something that I've been really interested in exploring lately.
Yeah, for sure. I think Beetajan, you can relate about the herbs because you had recently shared that you like to eat them for breakfast. The sabzi khordan.
The sabzi khordan. Really any meal, but
Yeah, any meal.
But definitely the spices. Oh my gosh, the spices. Yeah, I have a Moroccan soup that I make all the time. And the spices are so similar, and even the ingredients are really similar to the way that my mom makes abgoush. But I wanted to make this soup, and yeah, it's a delicious soup. But speaking of spices, so you have a candle line, you have a spice line. I'm just hearing so many things from you. I keep hearing the heartwarming.
Yeah.
And I've been wanting to ask you, does your name have meaning?
Delle?
Your last name?
Or my last name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, both.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
of it.
Well, they're definitely related. As I mentioned, my dad's side of the family is Jewish. And when they were living in Iran, his grandma at the time, just because of like certain political things, they had to change their last name. So apparently my dad's grandmother, her reputation in the community, my dad's from Shiraz, so like a small village. I guess her reputation in the community was kind of that woman that was everybody's like mother, was very nurturing, was very heartwarming and reliable. So I guess they were deciding on names to pick, and they came across Deljou, which basically means someone who's always in search of the goodness of others, which is really sweet. It's really cool
So
to
beautiful.
understand like the origin of where that name came from and kind of the overall character and quality of the bloodline, you know? So integrating into modern day, you know, where I had the opportunity to create my own business within the context of food and family and cuisine, and Delle is very much an extension of who I am. I wanted to pay homage to my last name, but also there are two parts, right? Delle references both the heart and the stomach in Persian culture. They often say food is often the way to somebody's heart, right? You invite them into your home, you feed them, you nourish them. It's a way of connecting. So I think our approach with Delle is like welcoming people into our space and awakening their heart through the medium of food, or through the medium of like hospitality, or even, you know, through the educational lens of having a conversation like this and explaining kind of the history of the name and all that. So it's a sweet story that I'd like to continue exploring myself and evolving over time.
Oh, that's
How
beautiful.
cool.
Yeah.
Yes, how cool that you have just like become and embraced this.
Yeah, you are Del. I love the meaning of Del. It's just like, you know, like the phrase Del bedel ra
exactly.
dare, or like, you know, Del I think is more to me than just your heart or your stomach. It's really just like the soul.
Right.
Your someone's soul is like spirit. Is kind of like when I hear the word
love
Del,
that.
that's what it refers to me.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the music elements to your events and just like pairing of music and food. And there's just so much history and so much culture that can be conveyed through the music. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on pairing and what your approach to that is.
Yeah, it's something that I'm continuously trying to evolve. In college, I worked at a radio station and did music directing and hosted a radio show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was great time. I look on those memories really fondly these days. But yeah, and after I graduated, I moved to New York City and worked in the independent music industry, kind of on the other side of radio. So I was servicing records to radio stations across North America, kind of radio campaigning and managing that entire front. So huge, you know, involvement in independent music. And there's just so much amazing independent music out there that is starting to get a little bit more traction these days with apps like TikTok and all that kind of stuff. There's such a beautiful array of amazing music that, you know, I think needs to kind of have more light shined upon it. So with our approach to Delle, like, I wanted to find a way to kind of integrate the food, the music, the culture, the family stories in kind of like an umbrella, right? And like my own space to expose people to the complexities of all these things. Because I think my approach, I want to help elevate people's relationships to all these mediums. So what we do with our dining events is if we're exploring a certain part of the world, let's use Iran as an example, or India or Morocco, we kind of pair that with music from the same region to really like elevate that experience and draw people into the context of where we are globally, right? It's not like we pair one dish with one song. It's kind of just this overall immersive experience to kind of give people a little bit more understanding of like where the food is coming from and what the culture sounds like, what the culture tastes like, what it looks like,
Wow.
And I think that kind of continues a greater conversation outside of the dining space, which I always find really interesting. I think you asked about the candles and the spices.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So I think it's, kind of a similar sentiment, this concept of continuing a conversation outside of the space that we have here. It's like the candles, I wanted to create a tangible product that kind of evoked that same concept of like place, culture, and flavor, but through scent. So there are 3 candles that we developed. I worked with a local candle maker here, and she used essential oils to kind of evoke the exact flavor that I was looking for. The inspiration behind this was limu amani, like all the way. That's exactly, I'm like obsessed with Persian dried limes. I think they're one of the most unique products because you have notes of like sourness, bitterness, like tannin, leather. It's fascinating. And I want to see that like kind of more present apart from korma sabzi, as like an ingredient, because I just think it's so powerful. But I found like a ground version of the Persian dried lime one day from one of my favorite spice purveyors called Burlap and Barrel. And I smelled it, and first of all, I started salivating right away just because it was so like pungent and delicious. And then I got notes of like apricot, and I got notes of like leather and like tobacco and smokiness. And the only thing that came to my mind in that moment was like, I need to make a candle out of this. Like, that's the only thing I want to do to have that sense of representation, in like a more, I guess, tangible realm.
Yeah.
So I wrote it down in my little journal, and a year later, I found the perfect person that was willing to do the project with me. I often say food is so much more than food, and that kind of sentiment continues throughout everything that I do. So it's not just a candle, it's an interactive candle. So they have little QR codes in the inside. You scan it, and it pulls up a recipe and a song pairing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're really cool. So they kind of like, again, continue that global experience of what food stands for and how food and music are also very much one and the same, So for the limu amani candle, we have obviously a korma sabzi recipe and then a beautiful Iranian song. We encourage people to light the candle, play the music, cook the recipe. It's a great like date night experience.
Sure.
Oh my gosh.
They're really cute, yeah. That one is called At Mamani and Baba's.
At Mamani and Baba's.
آن کس که از او چرخ و هوا رقص کنند.
Korma sabzi always reminds me of my grandmother. I feel like that's pretty, general across the board. And, everyone who smells the candle, they're like, oh, I'm automatically, taken back to like my grandma's house or my grandpa's house, or Sunday evenings hanging out with my family. It's just like a really sweet way to, again, continue the culture and have just representation for a very specific kind of nostalgic feeling that reminds us of our childhood, but in kind of a modern new age way, right?
Yeah.
I'm so obsessed by everything that you're saying. Eating food is so much more than eating food because you are feeling it and you're kind of smelling it, the aroma of the Persian spices and flavors, and then put music into it. All I could think about is, how can I get to Atlanta, Georgia to go to one of these events? But then now you're selling the thing that you can have that experience.
Right.
So I knew about your candles, but I didn't know that your candles come with the ability and the pairing. That is so unique.
Thank you.
To make it an immersive experience. That's
Exactly.
really cool.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We want to continue that interactive quality of like the sensory, right? The act of cooking itself, it borrows from all the senses. It's obviously taste, touch, smell, all that kind of stuff. But recently I've been really interested in the concept of cooking actually being very much about sound, right? And then, exploring what that means like from a musical standpoint. So when you're frying something versus sauteing versus baking versus whatever it may be, obviously chopping, all that kind of stuff, like the sound waves of actual cooking differ, which I find so interesting. But yeah, the candles, they're fun. We like to take certain aspects of like traditional Persian culture, right? Like we have a candle called Stay for Chai, and we try to evoke, obviously, Iranians' relationship to Earl Grey tea, because it's like, I would argue at the kind of like center of Persian culture / hosting. Chai is always something that you have at the end of a meal, right before guests leave. So we named it the aroma that brings people together. In the description, when you scan the QR code, it describes like what chai means to Persian people, what the symbolism of it is, how to engage through like a etiquette standpoint. When you put qand in between your two back teeth and you sip the chai, so you get a little wave of like sugar sweetness every time you swallow the beautiful, really strong tea. And then our last candle is called Poetry and Perfume. That one is the aroma that inspires like royalty and sweet comfort. So it was inspired by like the symbolism of saffron and rose and just that kind of warm feeling of luxury.
That's the one I wanted to buy.
It's one of my favorites. We also adorn them with beautiful different decorations that continue the sentiment of like what's actually in the candle, what the candle's made out of. So that one has black peppercorns and rose petals. They just look so beautiful. And we paired that one with a recipe for akbar mashti, which everybody loves.
Akbar mashti, delicious ice cream.
It's so good.
Frozen treat.
Yeah, lots of saffron and pistachios and rose water and cardamom, all wonderful things that make you feel like royalty,
Yeah.
So they're great. I really enjoyed the process of understanding my own heritage through the candle line. All these mediums that I do through Delle are opportunities for me to like become closer to my own relationship with my culture. Because I think like we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but when I first started Delle like a year and a half ago, my cooking style, my flavor profile definitely lies within Mediterranean cooking, but I never saw myself as like a Persian chef, right? Or like somebody who only cooks Persian food. And it's certainly not what I do, but I think I felt very like pigeonholed in that label or that identity. And I think, as I've evolved through my career and my relationship to cooking and the work I'm putting out there, I think I've only gained a lot more respect for the influence that my culture has had on me and found ways to, again, back to that concept of preserving, like defining it for myself moving forward, right? And like seeing how it shows up in my everyday in a either traditional or non-traditional way, and learning how I can kind of give that to people as a way to accessibly engage. We were talking about that concept of accessibility within the food context. And I think like through the classes and the educational route, food is like so much more, or cooking rather, is so much more intuitive than people think. And I really want to encourage them to like lean on that a little bit more because it's primitive. It should be something that comes so naturally to people. But I think a lot of people get like really overwhelmed, or there's so many options, or just not understanding how to connect to the actual act of cooking. But when you think about it, like if you listen to like the intuition of cooking and like understanding what flavors go well together and the actual act of like using fire at the end of the day to cook food, it comes a lot more naturally than I think people give themselves credit for. So through the cooking class lens, I'd like to encourage people to like trust their instincts a little more heavily through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is like a great opportunity time-wise for us to actually take that step to trying to preserve our culture and get to know our culture a little bit better. Right now, it's springtime is happening. It's Nowruz, and it's a great opportunity to kind of connect to our culture. And you're making it really easy for people by making these experiences, through your candle line with the music and the recipe, or also your events or your classes. So thank you for fostering preserving Persian culture through what you're doing and sharing that with everybody. And thank you so much for sharing all of your great thoughts with us on the podcast today with Bita and I and with our listeners. Tell us, where can people get more information about you, or hopefully if they're in the area, in Atlanta area, they can attend one of your events?
Yeah, absolutely.
All I could say is we could do an episode on each of those many things that you do, and everything that you were saying. I just want to say barikalla.
Oh, merci. Thank you.
Barikalla.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Good job.
It's such a vast conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, a great opportunity to come on podcasts like this and be able to speak upon it. So thank you for creating the space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to have the outlet to kind of express all these kind of things. So as far as where you can find me, probably most active on Instagram. The handle is Delle Dining. That's where we do a lot of the promotions and all that kind of stuff. And then on the website, we have option to sign up for a newsletter so you can get updates on when more candles come out or the spice line, things like that. And yeah, I'm around in Atlanta. Atlanta's a great city. It's growing. There's a lot of opportunity for small little local businesses to have the opportunity to showcase their work, and would love to travel to different cities with Delle one day and all that kind of stuff. But right now, the internet is my best friend. So.
Awesome. Great. We'll link to your resources and information in our show notes. So if people who are listening, if you, whatever app you're in, if you just scroll down, you'll see some notes and links there to easily access Nadia Deljou's page. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you. It was lovely. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Modern Persian Food Podcast with Bita and Bita. Thanks for spending time with us. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, consider telling a friend or giving us a good rating. You can subscribe to our show for free on your favorite podcasting app, or find us online at modernpersianfood.com or on Instagram for the recipes and information we talked about today. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and see you next time.